talking with my good friend John Russo, and what I came over to talk with him about is Eliot Spitzer. Today, as of 10:48, Spitzer has already resigned.
That's correct.
And for those of you who perhaps were under a rock and don't know the story, Spitzer was apparently allegedly involved in a prostitution ring for 10 years, spent up to $80,000, including $4,352 for 1 hour of service. And this was a person who had built his reputation on being a kind of an Eliot Ness in the legal industry as Attorney General. We can go on and on about that, but I want you to hear less of me and more of City Attorney John Russo of Oakland, who's I've known since 1991.
That's right.
But let's get to Spitzer.
Okay.
All right, John, what happened?
Well, it's hard to. I mean, it's hard to know, and it's hard to look into somebody's soul and speculate as to what happened here. There had been some indications earlier, some earlier campaign supporters of Spitzer who became disillusioned, and you always have supporters who become disillusioned. But what's interesting is, and I can't recall where I read it, but this particular account, they weren't disillusioned with Governor Spitzer on the issues. They were disillusioned with what they felt was a cavalier attitude toward rules applying to everybody, including Governor Spitzer. So it's not a surprise that in this particular case, you've got a man who's very powerful and is engaged in something that, frankly, he ought not have been engaged in. Now, it seems to me why he got there, what his sort of psychohistory is, all of that. I mean, I see a lot of speculation on the news networks about it. I'm not really prepared to do that. I think it's tough to be judgmental that
What do you think this says about any public official in power who, well, I mean, let me put it this way: do you think it sends a message to public officials, or is it just about an individual? In other words, it has nothing to do with anybody else?
No. Look, when you're a public official, you are under a microscope. I mean, you probably remember last May, I got a seatbelt ticket.
Right.
How many people get a seatbelt ticket? It's a common occurrence. I got a seatbelt ticket, and I was on the front page of the local section of the newspaper for getting a seatbelt ticket, and my name and the fact that I got a seatbelt ticket ran on the crawl underneath KTVU Morning News.
Right.
All these years, I've been an elected official for 14 years. I've never made the crawl for anything that my office has done, but for not wearing a seatbelt, I made the crawl. So we elected officials are under a microscope, and you get into this business understanding that you're under a microscope. Anyone who doesn't realize that is foolish and or arrogant. And so it is hard to avoid the conclusion that Governor Spitzer was very arrogant, especially if you are a reformer or a self-styled reformer, and you go about stepping on the toes of the rich and the powerful and the connected.
You think it was a setup?
No, I don't. I don't know in this particular case.
You said stepping on the toes of the rich and powerful and the connected.
Yeah,
that spells possible setup.
Well, yeah, I've heard that. It could be that people will look. I mean, I'm confident that the folks on Wall Street who were making hundreds of millions of dollars, to whom he was more than a thorn in their side, but a nemesis. You heard, of course, that at the stock exchange they applauded when they heard about it. I'm sure that they had people looking and doing awful research, and looking into his life and every aspect of his life, whether or not somebody, to use the cliche, dropped a dime on him is another question. But I really think that's not relevant. I saw Alan Dershowitz on television the other day, and he described prostitution as a victimless crime. I think that's an outdated, progressive position. I don't think prostitution is a victimless crime in most cases.
For those of you who don't know, Alan Dershowitz is a very famous criminal defense attorney who was known for having clients like Klaus von Bureau. Right,
exactly. And is generally considered to be a progressive, left-leaning, although not on all issues.
And he wrote the first book I ever read on the law, called The Best Defense.
Right. Well, he's very well regarded, but I think he's out of step with the times. When you look at what they're finding in San Francisco, some of the things we've seen here in Oakland about sexual slavery
Right.
and
Right.
importing women from other countries.
Right. The man.
It's not. It is not a victimless crime. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, in most cases, it's not a victimless crime.
Not to belabor this too much because I want to get to the matter of your running for re-election, but my question is this, and the Mann Act has been brought up.
Right.
And for those of you who don't know, the Mann Act is basically
Transporting people across state lines for immoral or illicit purposes.
now.
In this particular case, he hired a woman from a New York service, according to the allegations. He hired a woman from a New York service to meet with him and to perform whatever services with him at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. Therefore, it was a crossing of state lines, and therefore it implicates the Mann Act, which is very rarely utilized, which is one reason why people think this may have been a setup. Is, well, why use the Mann Act? No one ever uses
Right.
the Mann Act. And I think
she
that's...
she came of her own will, even though it was a payment. She didn't sign a contract, so you must get on that train, right?
Well, yes, but it's irrelevant. Here's what this story, in my estimation, is about.
Mhm.
It's about what I call the hypocrometer. And
Remember that, folks, the hypocrometer.
yeah, the hypocrometer. It's one thing if somebody in public life, for example, is very in tune with, trying to get more resources for treating alcoholism or mental illness, and then it turns out they themselves have a drinking problem or something like that, or they're caught in some type of compromising or embarrassing situation around alcohol. Well, the fact that they were empathetic and sympathetic means they get a much smoother ride in public reaction
Right.
than if Carrie Nation, who's trying to promote prohibition, is caught on a bender with a bottle of Jack Daniels.
Right.
In this case, Eliot Spitzer's problem.
Keep talking.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to keep talking here.
Okay. Now, in this case, Eliot Spitzer's problem. I'm going to wait until you're looking at it. It's not even
We'll just edit that part out. We'll just start over with that. Okay.
What's different in this case is that Eliot Spitzer's problem is that he promoted Eliot Spitzer's problem here is that he promoted a harsher approach toward prostitution and to the men who utilize prostitutes.
Right.
He was working on increasing sentencing. He sent people to jail for precisely the crimes that he has now committed.
He was on
And
some sort of
that-
task force, wasn't he? An anti-prostitution task force or something?
I don't know the details of that. I heard that he had been on the anti-prostitution issue.